Let's use the idea of variables, variable definitions, and function calls to start learning about how the Arduino environment gives you the capability to implement these embedded systems that we want to create. This is just a little code fragment that you might find in an extremely typical code. Let's go through it and see what the functions are. I'm going to define at the beginning a pin that I'm going to use. I wouldn't have to do this. I could simply use the number 13, the Arduino pin 13, as the number 13 all the way through here. However, it will be a lot easier to read instead of 13 showing up all over the place if we give it some name that relates to its function. You are going to be the one having to debug your code, so be nice to you and make it readable. I've defined a second variable, second type here, the type being Boolean. If you look up Boolean, it's from George Boole, who was a pioneer of digital logic. And you can tell from the assignment that Booleans can be true or false. So they're the fundamental digital variable. They would require only 1 bit of computer storage if we needed. In this case, we're going to use this Boolean variable to keep track if an external switch is open or closed. And it kind of seems like a Boolean choice, a digital decision, because it's got an is in the front. Is it or is it not? 0 or 1, true or false. We need to define that this pin we're going to use, the digital pin, is going to be used as an input. The digital pins on the Arduino can either be outputs, you push a voltage out onto them, or inputs. They read a digital or binary voltage, and they need to know which way they're operating. So we declare that the pin mode of the button pin, 13, is input. And the word input there is one of the key words of the language. It knows what that means. You don't have to tell it. To some extent, this line could have gone up in a setup code, but it doesn't really matter where we're working. The key thing we want to look at is a function that does something very useful. What this function does is it accepts the variable some pin that is possible to be an input or output pin, digital pin, like number 13. It reads that pin to find out if there's low or high, and it rounds those voltages off. If it's sort of low, it returns a 0, a false. And if it's sort of high, it returns a 1 or a true, and it returns that into this Boolean variable. So this would be the absolute minimal digital sensor, if you will. You've reached out into the world and asked what voltage is on pin 13, and now you have a binary, a Boolean, a true-false variable that knows what that voltage was, and you could now go off and have your code do something depending on what's now in that variable. So the external world, voltage on pin 13, has now been pulled into the internal world of the code, a Boolean value in that variable.